I wasn't supposed to feel small that night. I'd chosen my dress carefully. A deep emerald silk that caught the light just right, elegant without trying too hard. My husband, Marcus, had been excited about this launch event for weeks, talking about the brand's prestige, the guest list, the importance of being seen. I'd smiled and nodded, playing the supportive wife, even though these events always made me feel like I was performing a role I'd never fully auditioned for. But I went anyway because that's what you do when you love someone. You show up even when the room feels like it belongs to everyone but you. The venue was breathtaking, all modern glass and golden lighting, overlooking the glittering sprawl of Los Angeles at dusk. Champagne flutes sparkled on silver trays, laughter echoed off marble floors, and everywhere I looked, people wore their success like a second skin. I felt Marcus's hand on my lower back as we entered, guiding me through the crowd with practiced ease. He introduced me to colleagues and clients, and I shook hands, smiled warmly, said all the right things. But even as I played my part, I could feel her eyes on me from across the room. Vanessa, his assistant, watching with an expression I couldn't quite read. She approached us near the champagne fountain, her smile too bright, her heels clicking with purpose. Vanessa was beautiful in that sharp, calculated way. Sleek blonde hair, a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and an air of belonging that I'd never quite mastered. She greeted Marcus first, of course, laughing at something he said with a familiarity that made my stomach tighten. Then she turned to me, her eyes sweeping over my dress in a way that felt more like inventory than appreciation. "Oh, how lovely," she said, her tone honeyed with something I recognized but couldn't name yet. Vintage finds can be so charming. My dress wasn't vintage. It was new, carefully selected, and certainly not cheap by my standards. But before I could respond, she'd already shifted her attention back to Marcus, asking about a client meeting in a voice that excluded me entirely. I stood there, champagne going warm in my hand, feeling the first sting of something I'd been trying to ignore for months. This wasn't the first time Vanessa had made me feel like an accessory rather than a person. But here, surrounded by Los Angeles's elite, with cameras flashing and conversations humming around us, her dismissal felt sharper, more deliberate, more public. As the evening progressed, I noticed a pattern. Every time I joined a conversation, Vanessa would somehow redirect it, her comments subtle but cutting. When I mentioned my work as a part-time art consultant, she laughed softly and said, "Oh, how sweet that you have hobbies." When Marcus introduced me to a potential investor, she interrupted with urgent business talk, physically stepping between us until I simply backed away. The other guests didn't seem to notice, or maybe they did and chose to look away, uncomfortable with confrontation at such a carefully curated event. Either way, I felt myself shrinking, my confidence eroding with each passing minute. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment away from the glittering cruelty of it all. In the mirror, I studied my reflection. The careful makeup, the elegant dress, the woman who looked like she belonged but felt increasingly like an imposter. My hands trembled slightly as I reapplied my lipstick, and I hated that I was letting her get to me. But there was something in Vanessa's behavior tonight that felt different, more aggressive, like she was establishing territory in front of witnesses. And the worst part was that Marcus hadn't seemed to notice, too absorbed in networking and business talk to see how his assistant was systematically dismantling his wife's dignity. When I returned to the event, I found Marcus and Vanessa standing close together, their heads bent in conversation near a display of the brand's new jewelry line. The way they stood, his hand almost touching her shoulder, her body angled toward his, made something cold settle in my chest. I approached slowly, and as I did, Vanessa glanced up and smiled, that same too bright smile that never reached her eyes. "There you are," she said, as if I were a child who'd wandered off. "We were just discussing the Tokyo expansion. Such complex logistics. Probably not your thing." The dismissal was so casual, so practiced, that I almost didn't catch the insult wrapped inside it. But I did catch it. And as the night wore on, as Vanessa continued her performance of subtle dominance, I began to notice something else. A photographer circling the event, his camera capturing everything. Not just the posed shots for the brand's publicity, but candid moments, unguarded expressions, the truth behind the glamour. Every time I looked up, he seemed to be there. His lens pointed in our direction, documenting something I didn't yet understand. I had no idea then that those photographs would become evidence, that what he was capturing through his viewfinder would expose far more than Vanessa's attempts to humiliate me. The night was about to shift in ways none of us could predict. The event ended with the kind of air-kissing and business card exchanges that characterize Los Angeles society. Marcus was energized, talking about connections made and opportunities on the horizon as we drove home through the gleaming night. I sat in the passenger seat, still feeling the residue of Vanessa's calculated cruelty on my skin, but I didn't say anything. How do you explain to your husband that his assistant spent the evening systematically making you feel worthless without sounding paranoid or petty? So I stayed quiet, watching the city lights blur past, wondering if I was overreacting to what might have been nothing at all. The next morning I woke to find Marcus already dressed for work. His phone pressed to his ear, pacing our bedroom with unusual tension. When he ended the call, his face was pale, his jaw tight. "The photographer from last night," he said slowly. "He contacted the brand's PR team. Apparently, he captured some concerning images." My heart began to race, though I didn't know why yet. Marcus showed me his phone, and there on the screen was a photo that made the room tilt. Vanessa and Marcus standing closer than I'd even realized, her hand on his chest, his hand resting on her waist, both of them laughing in a way that looked nothing like a professional relationship. But that wasn't all. As Marcus scrolled through the images the photographer had flagged, a narrative emerged that I'd been too close to see clearly. There were shots of Vanessa whispering to other guests while glancing at me, her expression sharp with something that looked like satisfaction. Pictures of her positioning herself between Marcus and me at various moments throughout the night. Her body language possessive and deliberate. And then the most damning ones. Vanessa wearing a necklace from the brand's new collection, a piece that hadn't been available to guests, something that looked suspiciously like a gift. The kind of gift a man might give to someone who meant more than just professional assistance. I felt the room spin as the implications crashed over me. This wasn't just about public humiliation. This was about a relationship I'd been too trusting to recognize, too devoted to my marriage to see. Marcus was talking fast now, explaining, defending. His words tumbling over each other in a way that made me understand he knew exactly how guilty those photographs made him look. "It's not what it seems," he kept saying, but the images told a story that felt more honest than any words he could offer. The photographer hadn't just captured an event. He'd documented a betrayal. The photographer's name was Daniel, and when he called me directly that afternoon, his voice was gentle but firm. He explained that he'd been hired to shoot the event but had noticed the dynamics playing out, the way Vanessa had targeted me, the inappropriate intimacy between her and Marcus. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he said quietly, "and I know when something isn't right. These photos, people should see what was really happening behind all that glamour." He offered to send me the full collection, the raw, unedited truth of that night. I agreed, my hands shaking as I gave him my email address, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. When the photos arrived, I spent hours studying them, seeing the evening from an outside perspective for the first time. There I was, alone in corners while Marcus and Vanessa stood together. There was the moment she'd insulted my dress, her face caught in an expression of pure malice. There were the touches, the glances, the body language of two people who'd built something secret and shameful. But there were also photos of me, standing tall in my emerald dress, beautiful and dignified despite everything, my isolation captured with such clarity that it broke my heart. I looked like a woman who deserved so much better than what she was being given. I didn't confront Marcus immediately. Instead, I sat with the truth, letting it settle into my bones, feeling the grief of a marriage that had been eroding while I'd convinced myself everything was fine. The photos showed me something I'd been avoiding for months, that Vanessa's behavior wasn't just professional ambition or personality clash. She'd been trying to push me out, to claim space that wasn't hers, and Marcus had let her. Whether their relationship was physical or just emotional hardly mattered anymore. The intimacy in those images, the way he'd allowed her to disrespect me publicly, was betrayal enough. That evening, when Marcus came home, I had the photos printed and spread across our dining room table. He walked in to find me sitting calmly among the evidence, my hands folded, my expression carefully neutral. I watched his face as he took in the images, the guilt, the panic, the scrambling for explanations. "We need to talk about Vanessa," I said quietly, and something in my tone made him understand that this wasn't a conversation he could charm his way through. The photographer's lens had exposed more than inappropriate behavior at a luxury event. It had revealed the truth about who my husband had become, and who I deserved to be. The confrontation that followed was painful in ways I hadn't anticipated. Marcus admitted that his relationship with Vanessa had become complicated, though he insisted nothing physical had happened. He claimed her behavior at the event was jealousy he hadn't recognized, that the necklace was a company gift, that the closeness in the photos was being misinterpreted. But I'd learned something important from those images. I'd learned to trust what I saw rather than what I was told. The camera doesn't lie about body language, about intimacy, about the way two people occupy space together. And those photographs told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in my own marriage. The days that followed felt like walking through a dream where everything familiar had shifted slightly out of focus. I hired a lawyer, not because I'd decided on divorce yet, but because I needed someone in my corner who dealt in facts rather than feelings. Marcus moved into the guest room, and the house filled with a silence that was somehow louder than any argument. Vanessa was fired. That much happened quickly, the photographs giving the company no choice but to act. But the damage she'd done, the space she'd carved out in my marriage, that would take much longer to address, if it could be addressed at all. Daniel, the photographer, became an unlikely ally. He sent me additional images from the event, not of Marcus and Vanessa but of me. Beautiful shots where I looked strong and elegant, moments of grace I hadn't known I possessed. "I wanted you to see yourself the way others saw you that night," he wrote in the email. "Not diminished. Powerful." Looking at those photos, I began to understand that Vanessa's attempts to shame me had failed in ways she'd never know. I had shown up, held my head high, moved through that room with dignity even as she tried to tear me down. The exposure I'd feared had actually revealed my strength. Marcus begged for forgiveness, for another chance, his remorse seeming genuine in the way it consumed him. He cut all contact with Vanessa, showed me his phone freely, attended the couples therapy I insisted on. And slowly, painfully, we began to talk about the marriage we'd had versus the one we wanted. What emerged from those conversations was uncomfortable but necessary. I'd made myself small to fit into his world, and he'd grown comfortable with a wife who didn't ask for much. Vanessa had simply filled the space I'd created by diminishing myself, offering him the attention and admiration I'd stopped providing once I started feeling like I didn't belong. The scandal rippled through Marcus's professional circles, the story morphing as it traveled from person to person. Some people blamed Vanessa entirely, painting her as a calculating homewrecker. Others whispered about Marcus's judgment and integrity. A few, surprisingly, reached out to me with quiet support, other wives who'd felt similarly dismissed at similar events, who recognized themselves in my story. The exposure I'd dreaded became something else, a kind of liberation from pretending everything was perfect when it clearly wasn't. I started painting again, something I'd abandoned years ago when it seemed impractical compared to supporting Marcus's career. My art consultant work transformed from a hobby Vanessa had mocked into something I pursued with renewed purpose and confidence. I bought bolder clothes, spoke up more in conversations, stopped apologizing for taking up space. The woman in that emerald dress had been beautiful, yes, but she'd also been hiding, playing small, seeking approval from people whose opinions didn't matter. I didn't want to be her anymore. I wanted to be the version of myself that existed before I learned to shrink. 6 months later, I attended another industry event, this time on my own terms. Marcus was there, still my husband. We'd chosen to work on our marriage, though the future remained uncertain. But this time when I walked into that room I felt different. I belonged because I decided I did, not because someone granted me permission. People approached me differently too, with respect that felt earned rather than given as an extension of Marcus's status. And when I saw Daniel across the room, camera in hand, I smiled genuinely. His photographs had exposed a painful truth, but they'd also set me free. The irony wasn't lost on me that Vanessa's attempt to humiliate me had ultimately strengthened me in ways comfort never could. By trying to make me feel worthless at that designer event, she'd forced me to examine where my worth actually came from. And it wasn't from my husband's success, designer events, or the approval of Los Angeles society. It came from within, from the woman I'd been before I learned to diminish myself, and the woman I was becoming as I remembered my own value. The exposure had been brutal, yes, but necessary. Sometimes you need to be seen at your most vulnerable to understand your own strength. Looking back now, I can see that night as a turning point. The moment when the carefully constructed image of my perfect life cracked open to reveal the truth underneath. The photographer's lens had captured what I'd been avoiding. A marriage built on unequal terms, a sense of self I'd sacrificed for belonging, a situation that had been slowly eroding my spirit. The exposure hurt, the revelation was devastating, but the clarity that followed was worth every painful moment. I learned that real belonging doesn't require making yourself smaller. It requires having the courage to be fully, unapologetically yourself, even when, especially when, that makes others uncomfortable. Sometimes the worst moments become the best gifts, though you can't see it while you're living through them. That night at the designer event, surrounded by luxury and pretense, I felt more alone than I'd ever been. But the photographer's hidden shots gave me something precious. Evidence of my own worth, documentation of my strength, proof that I was never the problem. Vanessa tried to shame me, but she actually freed me. And now, when I look at those photographs Daniel took, I don't see a woman being diminished. I see a woman on the edge of transformation, about to step into her own power. The flashbulbs exposed more than scandal that night. They illuminated the path forward, toward a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. And for that unexpected gift, I'll always be grateful.